Assalamu alaikum. Today, inshallah, we are going to finalize this chapter about the open economy. We studied the trade balance and the difference between exports and imports and the net capital flow. Now we are going to study the exchange rates and how it determines these variables. So in this section, we extend the model to discuss the prices at which a country makes exchanges in the world markets. So as we started in international trade and trade exchange between countries in this open economy, so we will face differences in the currencies and the prices, how all this determines. We examined the what determines the price of domestic goods relative to the foreign goods. We also examined what determines the rate at which the domestic currency trades for the foreign goods. Also, our model shows how protectionist trade policies like the import quotas or subsidies and all these trade policies, which is the policies designed to protect the domestic industries from foreign competition. How these policies influence the amount of international trade and the exchange rate. So now let's start with the nominal exchange rate. The nominal, we have a nominal exchange rate and the real exchange rate. The nominal exchange rate is the relative price of domestic currency in terms of foreign currency. يعني the relative price of SOM, for example, is 10,000 SOMs for $1. For example, this is the relative price. This is the nominal exchange rate. $1 equals 10,000 SOM, for example, or 15 pounds, Egyptian pounds, and so on. There is some examples for some exchange rates in different countries. I think maybe they need to be updated. But anyway, so this is the nominal exchange rate. The real exchange rate, which is denoted by this letter, Greek letter epsilon, the lowercase of the Greek letter epsilon. So the real exchange rate is the relative price of domestic goods in terms of foreign goods. The relative price of domestic goods in terms of foreign goods. Yani how much this good I can buy in dollar or in SOM. For example, the Japanese Big Mac bear the Japanese or the United States Big Mac. This good is the Big Mac is a sandwich of McDonald's. How much it costs in Japan and how much it costs in the United States. There is differences in the price or the relative price of these goods. So this is the real exchange rate. So we saw the nominal interest rate, which is the relative price of domestic currency, the price of the currency in terms of another currency. But the real exchange rate is the relative price of domestic goods in terms of foreign goods. How to understand the units of the real exchange rate? The real exchange rate equals the nominal rate multiplied by the this price above is the home price, the price in the domestic country, and the under or the below one is the price P star is for the price in the foreign country. So P will be for the price or the home price, and P star is the foreign price. So the real exchange rate equals the nominal exchange rate, which is, for example, yen, Japanese yen per dollar, multiplied by the P, which is the dollars per unit for US goods, and or divided by the yen per unit for Japanese goods. So You can see from this equation that the yen per unit for US goods divided by the yen per unit for Japanese goods, which is the real exchange rate, which equals the units of Japanese goods per unit of US goods. The units of Japanese goods per unit of يعني how many one unit of US goods equals how many units in Japanese goods. For example, let's take McDonald's example, Mac example. Mac example ده اللي هو one good like the Big Mac, this sandwich called Big Mac. This is our good here in this example. The price in Japan of this good, which is P star, يعني the price abroad or in this foreign country is 200 yen. And the price of the same good in the United States, P equals $2.5. And the nominal exchange rate between the yen and the dollar is 120 yen per dollar. So how can we get the real exchange rate by this equation? So 120, the nominal exchange rate by the home price divided by the price abroad will equal 1.5. What does this mean? That to buy a US Big Mac, someone from Japan would have to pay an amount that would buy 1.5 Japanese Big Macs. Okay, so the real exchange rate in the real world and our model. The real world, we can think that the real exchange rate as the relative price of a basket of domestic goods in terms of a basket of foreign goods. But in our model, there is just one good. So the real exchange rate is the relative price of one country's output in terms of the other country's output. That's for simplicity. So how can we see, we now know the main concepts of this section. So how the net exports depends on the real exchange rate. We said that we are in open economy. There is trade exchange, international trade, exports, imports. So the countries, different countries deal with each other with different currencies and so on. So we need to know how the real exchange rate affects the exports and the imports and the net exports. As we can see, the rise of the real exchange rate, yani when the real exchange rate increases, the US goods become more expensive relative to the foreign goods. Again, when the real exchange rate increases, so in this case, we are talking in all our examples about the exchange rate of the American dollar. So when the exchange rate, the real exchange rate increases, the US goods become more expensive relative to foreign goods. So in this case, what will happen? The exports will decrease and the imports will increase. Because who will buy an expensive good, you can, that makes the import increase and so on. So you import more cheap goods and so on, and you cannot export more. Which country will buy or export from you an expensive good relative to the foreign goods? So in this case, the net exports, which is the difference between the exports and imports, will decrease. We can see this in reality. The US net exports and the real exchange rate, the relation between them, as we saw here, there is a positive, negative relationship between the real exchange rate. When it rises, the net exports will decrease. So let's see this in the graph. We can see here the net exports of the United States during these different years. It's decreased, okay, and at the same time the trade weighted real exchange rate increases. As you can see, for example, in 1985, you can see the big difference when the net exports or the real exchange rate increases. So the net exports also decreases at this amount. In 1993, for example, when the real exchange rate decreased, so the net exports decreased, and so on. So now we can get the net exports function. And the net exports function reflects this inverse relationship between the net exports and the real exchange rate. Okay, so the net exports will be a function of the real exchange rate. You can see here the net exports curve for the United States. Also, this inverse or relative negative relationship, as we can see, when the exchange rate, the real exchange rate is relatively low, when it is low here over zero, but low, the US goods are relatively expensive, not so expensive, but relatively expensive. So when the real exchange rate relatively low, yani not very low, so the US goods also relatively expensive. So the US net exports will be high, as we can see here. But when the real exchange rate at high enough value of real exchange rate, the US goods become so expensive that we export less than we import. So in this case, we can see the net export will be at the left side from zero, it will be negative or by minus. So how this is how we saw now how the real exchange rate determines the net exports, but how the real exchange rate itself is determined. The accounting identity says that the net exports equals the saving minus the investment. And we saw earlier that how the saving minus investment in is determined, as the S for saving depends on the domestic factors, the output, the income, the fiscal policy variables, the government increase or decrease the government spending and taxes and so on. And we see also what determines the investment, which is the world interest rate. So the real exchange rate must adjust to ensure that this equation. As we can see here, neither the savings nor the investment depend on the real exchange rate. We saw in the previous slide what determines the saving and the investment. Okay, so they don't depend on the real exchange rate. So the net capital outflow curve will be vertical. It's a fixed or constant. It's not affected by the real exchange rate on the vertical axis. So the real exchange rate adjusts to equate the net exports with net capital outflow, which is the saving minus the investment. As we can see here, the intersection between the two curves. This is the adjusted real exchange rate. To more interpret this or explain this figure, supply and demand in the foreign exchange market, you can see that the demand here, that foreigners need dollars to buy US net exports, and the supply is the net capital outflow in the vertical curve is the supply of dollars to be invested abroad. So we have also four experiments in this section. The fiscal policy at home, what happens according to it, the fiscal policy abroad, the increase in the investment demand, and plus the trade policy to restrict imports. The first case, the fiscal policy at home. What happens when we have a fiscal expansion? fiscal expansion like increasing in government spending or decrease in taxes, that reduces the national savings because we have increase in spending and reduce in taxes, so the savings will be less or reduce. So the net capital outflow and the supply of dollars in the foreign exchange markets also will reduce, causing what, as we can see here, the real exchange rate to rise and the net exports to fall. The second experiment is the fiscal policy approach. The fiscal policy approach. Any increase in the world interest rate will reduce the investment, as we know. So increasing the net capital outflow, right? Because the saving minus a investment. And the supply, consequently, the supply of dollars in the foreign exchange markets. So in this case, this will cause the real exchange rate to fall and the net exports to rise. The third experiment is the increase in investment demand. What happened? Well, there is an increase in the demand for investment. Any increase in investment reduces the net capital outflow and supply of dollars in the foreign exchange markets. As we can see here, the curve shifted to the left, causing what? The real exchange rate to rise and the net exports consequently to fall. Finally, the trade policy to restrict imports. What if a country have new trade policies for restricting some imports, like what happened between the United States and China in this trade war, and they restricted the imports for many Chinese goods and so on, like by imposing quotas or subsidies and so at any given value of the real exchange rate, doesn't matter because it's about a new policies, another policy. It doesn't depend on the, in this case, the net exports doesn't depend on the real exchange rate. So in any value of the real exchange rate, and import quota, this is the new trade policy, importing import quota will increase the imports and increase the net export. So importing quota as a trade policy will decrease the import and increase the net exports. And the demand for dollars shifts right as you can see. So trade policy doesn't affect the saving and investment, as we can see in the vertical axis. So capital flows and the supply for dollars remain fixed in this case. So the result from this policy may be the change in the real exchange rate will be more than zero as the demand increase. Also, the change in net exports will not move as the supply fixed. The change also in imports will be less than zero according to this new policy, and the change in the exports will be less than zero as the exchange rate, the real exchange rate rise. What are the determinants of the nominal exchange rate? As the nominal exchange rate is a main factor in determining the real exchange rate. What determines the nominal exchange rate? Start with the expression, as we said, for the real exchange rate, that equals the nominal exchange rate multiplied by the home price divided by the abroad price. So solving for the nominal exchange rate will be, when rearranging this equation, it will be the real exchange rate multiplied by the foreign price divided by the home price. So the nominal interest rate, the nominal exchange rate in this case depends on the real exchange rate and the price levels at home and abroad. And we know how each of them is determined. As we can see, the net exports determines the exchange real exchange rate, which equals the net capital flow, and the money balance for the price, the home price, which is the function of the world interest rate plus the inflation rate and the output, and also the same thing with the foreign price. So rewrite this equation in growth rates, how much this nominal exchange rate grow, increase or decrease. As you can see here, the change in the nominal exchange rate divided by the exchange rate equals the change in the real exchange rate divided by the exchange rate plus change in the foreign price divided by the foreign price itself minus the change in the home price divided by the home price, which is equal to the change in the real exchange rate divided by the real exchange rate plus the foreign inflation rate minus the home inflation rate. So for a given value of the real exchange rate, the growth rate of the nominal exchange rate equals the difference between foreign and domestic inflation rate. So as you can see here in this graph, to explain more the inflation differentials and the nominal exchange rate. As the greater is the inflation rate in the Uzbekistan, for example, relative to the United States, the faster the dollar should rise relative to the SOM. As we can see here in many countries, many different countries, the relationship between the percentage change in the nominal exchange rate in the vertical axis and the changes in inflation in the horizontal axis. There is a positive relationship and linear relationship between them. So in reality, the inflation differentials affect or related to the nominal exchange rate. Okay. So this figure also shows a very clear relationship between the inflation differentials and the rate of the dollar appreciation. As the higher the country's inflation relative to the United States inflation, the faster the US dollar will appreciate, as you can see here, against the country's currency. For some countries, for example, like Japan, Singapore, we can see it's the left side by minus or less than 0. They have lower they have lower inflation rate than the US. So we see that the US exchange rate depreciates relative to the real this exchange rate of this currency of this country. So this is about the real exchange rate and the nominal exchange rate. What about the purchasing power parity? How can we define the purchasing power parity? It is like a doctrine that a principle that states that goods must sell at the same price in all countries. The goods must sell at the same price in all countries, sure, after adjusting to the currency. Which means if the 10,000 som equals $1, so if you buy a notebook with 10,000 som in Uzbekistan, so you should buy this notebook in the United States by $1. So this is what this principle says. The nominal exchange rate adjusts to equalize the cost of a basket of goods across countries. So, you know, the arbitrage, when you you visit some country and you find another goods You can find a mobile iPhone, new iPhone, with if you when you exchange this the price of this iPhone according to your local currency, you think it is more cheap in this country, so you make this arbitrage process. You buy it from the other country with the cheapest price according to the dollar, for example. So the purchasing power parity doctrine said that the nominal exchange rate multiplied by the home price, which is the cost of the basket of domestic goods in foreign currency. And we have here the cost, the P is the cost of basket of domestic goods in domestic country. This will equal the P star, or the cost of basket of foreign goods in foreign currency. So we can see that the nominal exchange rate here equals the abroad price divided by the home price, and the purchasing power parity doctrine implies that the nominal exchange rate between two countries equals the ratio of the countries' price levels. So it implies that the cost of the basket of goods, even a basket with just one good like a Big Mac or latte, should be the same across countries. As EB here, the nominal exchange rate multiplied by the home price equals the foreign currency cost of a basket of goods in the United States, while the abroad price, the cost of a basket of foreign goods. And it also implies that the baskets cost the same in both countries. So then, if the nominal exchange rate will equals the abroad price divided by the home price, so according to this equation, it will be equal 1. So it will be the same price. As the real exchange rate equals the nominal exchange rate multiplied by the home price divided by the abroad price, and we said that the nominal exchange rate is P star divided by B, which is we can see here equals 1, and in this case the net exports curve will be horizontal as the real exchange rate equals 1. Under the purchasing power parity, changes in the saving and investments have no impact on the real exchange rate or the nominal exchange rate. So it was assessed uh, fixed or constant, and now we also have the net exports will be the same or fixed. So revisiting our model of the purchasing power parity implies that the net exports curve should be horizontal at the real exchange rate equals 1. And the intuition for the horizontal net exports curve, as under the purchasing power parity, different countries' goods are perfect substitutes, and international arbitrage is possible. If the relative price of the United States goods falls even a tiny bit below 1, then here is a profit opportunity, as you can buy US goods and sell them abroad. Hence, the tiniest drop in the US real exchange rate causes a massive increase in the net exports. And similarly, if the relative price of the US goods rises even a tiny amount above 1, then it is profitable to buy foreign goods and sell them in the United States. So this arbitrage causes a massive increase in imports and decrease in net exports. So under the purchasing power parity, the real exchange rate equals 1, regardless of the net capital outflow, which is the saving minus the investment, and the change in the S or I have no impact on the real exchange rate. Does this principle hold in the real world? Simply no. For two reasons, the international arbitrage is not possible, and also non-traded, there is some non-traded goods, and also the transportation costs affect prices, and The other reason is for the different countries' goods, not perfect substitutes. They don't have the same features, the same qualities, and so on. So we can't say it should be the same price. Nonetheless, the purchasing power parity is a useful theory. It is simple and intuitive, and in the real world, the nominal exchange rates tend towards their purchasing power parity values over the long run. You can see here the case study about the Reagan deficit that we have in the United States between the 70s and 80s. You can read this case study in the textbook in details. Will apply what we studied in the previous slides on this. Because of time, you can read it in details in the book and see how you can apply on this case study. So the US as a large open economy. We now talked about the closed economy and the small open economy. What about the large open economy? So far we have learned long run models for two extreme cases, the closed economy in chapter 3 and the small open economy in this chapter, chapter 6. So a large open economy, like the United States, for example, falls between these two extremes. And the results from large open economy analysis are a mixture of the results for the closed and small open economy cases. As we can see in this example, if there is مثلا physical expansion in the three models, physical expansion, as we said, increase in government spending or decrease in taxes. So this expansion, as we mentioned, causes national saving because you increase the spending and decrease the taxes or revenues, so the saving will be fall. What happens when the saving fall according to each of these three models? The effects of this depends on the openness of the economy and the size of the economy and so on. So it's not it is dynamic. In the large open economy, it is dynamic. It is about how large is this economy, the size, and how open is this economy. So when the savings fall, we can see the interest rates in the closed economy rises and the investment falls and the net exports not changed. In the small open economy, the interest rate doesn't change when the saving fall, and the investment doesn't change also, and the net exports falls. In the large open economy, we can see that the interest rate rises, but not as much as in the closed economy. So we can see it is something in between. Also, the investment falls, but not as much as in the closed economy, and the net exports falls when the savings falls, but not as much as in the small open economy. To summarize this topic, the nominal exchange rate, as we see, is the rate at which people trade the currency of one currency for the currency of another country. The real exchange rate is the rate at which people trade the goods produced by two currencies. And the real exchange rate equals the nominal exchange rate multiplied by the ratio of the price levels in the two countries. We see also that because the real exchange rate is the price of domestic goods relative to foreign goods, an appreciation of the real exchange rate tends to reduce the net exports. At the equilibrium, real exchange rate is the rate at which the quantity of net exports demanded equals the net capital outflow. And finally, the nominal exchange rate is determined by the real exchange rate and price levels in the two countries. And other things, when other things remain equal, a high rate of inflation leads to a depreciating currency. So this is the end of our topic and our chapter. Thank you so much. See you and goodbye and good luck.